Hi, this is Carla Sanford, Beef Extension Specialist from Montana State University. I'm located on campus in Bozeman. My background is reproductive physiology, and so I wanted to talk with you about reproduction strategies and considerations during drought. I do apologize for not being able to be with you in person in your county today. Please feel free to reach out to your extension agent. They have my contact information, and I'll have my email address at the end of this presentation. We'd love to work with you and assist you during this time, so just reach out and let us know how we can help. So I actually borrowed this first slide from Dr. Tom Geary at USDA Fort Kehoe over in Miles City, and I think this is a great slide because it talks about calving distributions, how many calves are being born in that first, second, and third cycle. So we have day of calving season and then percentage of calves being born. So discussing the fact that every ranch is a little different, your management practices, where you're located, and some of the trials and tribulations that you deal with. And so which ranch is better able to respond to drought? And so we have a variation or a variety of different calving distributions. So this green W ranch, the proportion of calves, the highest proportion of calves being born actually occurs anywhere between day 40 and day 50. And so quite a spread of a 100-day calving season versus this light blue S ranch. We had a higher proportion of calves born in that first 20-day period, and that's something that we need to shoot for. We can really have precision livestock production and be able to be more strategic with how we're feeding those calves and lining those females up for the subsequent breeding season when we have a really tight calving distribution such as this. So what does drought cost us? Well, I know Dr. Megan Von Eman did a great job of talking about nutrition and some alternative feedstuffs. We're trying to eliminate substantial body weight, body condition loss in those females because we know that that's going to impact milk production. And so less milk, we're going to have lighter calves. And then we're going to create an issue where we're struggling in terms of marketing. So if we, as you would assume, look at precipitation, so here's some data from 2015, and so they looked at weaning weights on an average year, so average precipitation in that year versus a drought year, and as you would suspect, they're going to have lighter calves in a time of drought, substantially lighter calves from this example from 2015. Not only going to impact those calves that we have this year, but it could impact fertility. And so that's going to impact our bottom dollar this year as well as next year moving on. So thinking about longevity and stability of those females is another consideration that we should have. So what is the impact of reproductive efficiency? So research has shown us that reproduction is 5 times more important than growth rate and 10 times more important than carcass quality in terms of profitability. And Dr. Kai Poehler at Texas A&M University has done some number crunching for us and has calculated that the annual cost of reproductive failure in the beef industry is about $600 million and about $1.4 billion in the dairy industry. And so first and foremost, we have to make sure that we're feeding these females so that they can achieve reproductive success because it can be quite costly in addition to having to deal with drought and knowing how that can negatively impact our females. In terms of what I consider the recipe for success, you know, we do a great job of lining these females up during the pre-breeding stage. We feed for late gestation, third trimester nutrition. We know that exponential growth of that calf is going to occur during that time, and we have to think about these females that are getting ready to calve, lactate, and then we need them to return to estrus. And so this is important, but we also don't want to forget about these females throughout gestation. So not just shortly after breeding and not just late term, but throughout gestation. And so talk a little bit about fetal programming. We're seeing some data that shows that we really need to maintain these females properly and adequately throughout gestation. And then also post-calving. So post-calving management is important for the survival of that calf, but also for that female. Again, so she can return to estrous cyclicity and be able to rebreed in that subsequent breeding season. So in terms of events that occur during gestation, here's a figure showing the growth of the bovine fetus over the course of gestation, and then length and weight in terms of pounds on the both y-axes. And so as you would assume, in that first trimester, that first 3-month period, we don't really have substantial weight or length or size of that fetus. What's going on in terms of the dam, this is actually when she is lactating. Peak lactation is going to occur around day 60 postpartum or day 60 after calving. So talking about the nutrient requirements during that point. So really having to make sure that those females are receiving the nutrition and they're on an elevated plane of nutrition during that time point. During the mid-gestation, this is when we're starting to get substantial growth in terms of length of the fetus. And at the latter part of the second trimester, we start to have an increase in weight in pounds as well. In the dam, this is the time point where weaning can occur, and we'll talk a little bit about early weaning. And this is a great opportunity to be able to put some body weight, body condition on these females. This is the most economical in terms of the timing of which we can put body condition back on these females, so during stage 2 and during that time of weaning. During late gestation, 3rd trimester, we have exponential growth of the fetus in terms of weight and length, but this is the most difficult time to put on body condition and body weight of those females, so it can be very costly at this time. So one thing that I'm a huge proponent of is maintaining body condition. We don't want to have replacement heifers that are on elevated plane of nutrition and then throw them out on range and they lose substantial weight and condition. And in our gestating females, we want to try to maintain and really reduce or eliminate substantial body weight and body condition during that time point, because it can be really costly in terms of trying to get that female back or rescuing body condition on that female. Fetal programming is something I'm sure that you have heard in publications and on news and radio and so on and so forth. And so there is substantial research that's going on out there, and this is actually some research from 2012 from Dr. Rick Funston, and he showed that heifer calves that were exposed to nutrient restriction in utero, so they're in terms of the nutritional plane of their dams, those heifers were lighter at birth, they were lighter at weaning time, and then it actually took them longer to attain puberty. So nutrient restriction not only has negative impacts on that dam, but also that calf that she's developing in utero. And this is important to us, especially in Montana, because if we are developing our own replacement heifers out of our herd, these females are being lined up for success or potentially issues in utero, not just after they're being born. In terms of precision record keeping, in terms of precision ranch management, I think of it very similar to that of agronomy and crop production. And so we take soil samples and assess soil quality, and we adjust our management for a particular field so that we can have adequate yields in our crops. And so we have to have that same attitude with our cattle. And this first starts off with record keeping. So if you can have individual records, that's great. If you can have in terms of, parity in age, so how are your replacement heifers doing, your young females, so those 2-3-year-old females, as well as your mature cows, going through your receipts and knowing how your calves did at the sale barn, and how you marketing them, those are important to be able to keep and historically look back at. And so looking at our breeding season and lining that up for our calving season, again, we want to increase the proportion of females that are bred earlier in the breeding season, because we're going to have a better calving distribution, tighter calving distribution, and more born in that first 21 or 30 period that we saw in that first slide. And if we can, we need to manage our females by parity, age, and sex. Another thing that we have to consider, especially during drought, is, strict culling, okay? So keeping only those females that conceive early, and we'll talk about some other culling parameters. And again, we want to manage through gestation as well as post-calving. And are we meeting the needs of these cattle? So this also includes our bulls, whether it's bulls that we're developing, our yearling bulls that we're potentially going to be putting out on females, as well as our mature bulls, in addition to our females. And so being able to sort by stage of life, sex, stage of production, and then of course using body condition scoring. And so I'm a huge proponent of body condition scoring because it's free, and it really doesn't matter if you're fighting with your spouse, whether it's a body condition score 5 or 5.5. It's a matter that you're doing it, you're recording it, and then you're adjusting your management based off of the condition of your cattle. So body condition scoring is a system. Our US scale is 1 to 9, so an average would be at 5. It's a visual assessment of the energy or body condition that that animal has. And in terms of locations that I like to use on the animal to assess and score, I use the ribs. Okay, so how many ribs can you, 4 ribs can you see easily? For example, we have a problem if your cattle look like this one in the top right picture. We also have a problem if this is what your cattle look like in the bottom right picture. So we can count several of the ribs on this animal. We can also see the spinous process or the vertebrae very easily. Very, very little body coverage or body condition, fat coverage on the top line of this animal. From hooks to pins is a third place to look. And as you can tell, the more drastic of a V, okay, so here a more level is a 6, and the more drastic we can go down as far as a 2. So the more of a V that it makes from hooks to pins, that's indicative of a lower body condition score. And so as you can see here, this female has quite a definitive V versus this lower female. She's actually not even fully, level, but she's so over conditioned that she's round on that hind end. So of course this one's going to be above a 6, and then this female is actually going to be, I would say, in that 3 range in terms of how many ribs I can count and so on and so forth. And so feel free to reach out to your county extension agent. We have some great resources on body condition score, and so we won't go into that to great detail today, but feel free to reach out to get some additional resources on body condition scoring. And so postpartum anestrus is that time period where these females are not cycling, because we do have time that is needed for recovery. And so nutritional status during post-calving is going to impact how long that female's not cycling or how long it takes for her to return to cyclicity. And so here we have body condition score 3 to a 7, and then postpartum interval. And as you would assume, the lower the body condition score, the higher the postpartum interval is. And so these body condition score 3s, we were out to 89 days versus a body condition score 7, about 31 days. Now I'll grant that the cost that it's going to take of these females to stay in a 7 is really not feasible from a business standpoint. And so that's why we really want to shoot for our herd to stay between a 5 and a 6. And remember, if we want her to have a calf every year, we're going to have a postpartum interval. We're going to have to need to stay between 83 days or under. Okay, and so those body condition score 3s are not going to be able to do that. They're going to be late calvers next year because she's in poor condition this year. Low body condition score will result in poor fertility. So we have research showing that it will result in low conception rates, and this is due to the fact that it will reduce follicular size, reduced embryo quality, and then those females are going to have a decreased number of follicular waves coming out of anestrus. Low body condition score can actually cause abortion, and if we think about it, it's essentially the cost of that embryo in order to maintain survival in that female. So we don't want to put females in that situation where they're simply trying to survive rather than being able to move on in production and be pregnant. And again, we want our herd to stay between about a body condition score 5 and a 6. This is a sweet spot in terms of cost efficiency and then maintaining these animals in a way that they can perform and stay in the herd. And so if your cattle look like this one in the image, then we got problems. So this one, I like this Cowtoon, if you will. They're hardy breed, all right, or they wouldn't survive that branding. And so we don't want our cattle to look like that. So again, use body condition score. It's really effective. It's something that we need to use, record, adjust. You know, if your cattle are coming through the chute, that's a great time to record it and write down and then assess how the cattle are doing. Visually, if you're out there in a particular group and you look around, you know, those females that are in good body condition score, they stand out, they look nice, and those that are too thin are going to stand out. So if I have 100 head and I go out there and 10 of them are too thin, they're below a body condition score, that essentially tells me that 90% of my herd are in good body condition score. And so rather than having to go out there and individually write down each individual animal's body condition score, because I don't think we have the time for that when they're out on range, we can assess, you know, different groups and be able to write that down and then try to figure out why is it that those animals are in low body condition score. So is it a parity? Is it a nutrition? So on and so forth, and then assessing our management and reevaluating and changing our management based off of that. When are the times that I want to do body condition scoring? So if I do it at pre-breeding, that's actually going to give me time to get feedstuffs and improve her plane of nutrition. And if I can do this, at least get that better feedstuff to her 60 days prior to breeding, I still have some time that I can reduce the negative impact of that low body condition score and get her in better shape. Doing it at gestation and wintertime, that's going to assist me. Again, I want to maintain these females. I don't want them to drop off drastically at any point in production. And then at pre-calving, that's going to allow us to get better feedstuffs to these females to make sure that they're going to have energy for the actual act of parturition and calving, but also to be able to lactate and then return to estrus and start cycling and rebreed. And then again at pre-weaning, because if we do it at pre-weaning, again, weaning is that most opportune time to try to really increase body condition in these females. So if we do it at pre-weaning, we can get up with our nutritionist and our extension agent and figure out what feedstuffs are available, what's going to be most cost effective, and get it in there and improve the body condition of those females so that we can get ready for the next stage. And here we have the heifer body condition score at calving and how that impacts pregnancy. So we had females, first calf heifers that were in a body condition score of 4, 5s, and 6. And then body weight, as you would assume, those body condition score 6s were heavier versus the 5s and the 4s. Calf birth weight, so the body condition score 4 had the lightest calves. The body condition score 6s had heavier calves numerically. For dystocia score, however, we had no difference in terms of females being in a particular body condition score. So those body condition score 6s weren't in overly fleshed to the point where they had issues with dystocia. So that can be one misconception, that we don't want them too heavy, and I agree, we don't want them too over-conditioned to the point where that they could have problems, but we can have issues with dystocia if they're getting under a body condition score 4 because they can actually not have enough energy to actually get through the act of calving through parturition. And so we don't want to starve these females out with the, going under the misconception that, I need them to be a body condition score 4 because they're going to be too heavy at calving and I'm going to have to pull calves. Because as we can see here, there was no difference between a body condition score 4, 5, or 6. Here we have the percent pregnant and by the day of that breeding season. And again, we want to have more females pregnant in that first 21-day period. And so by day 20, those body condition score 4s, we had fewer of those pregnant by day 20, and we had 47% in our body condition score 6. So almost half of that heifer were pregnant in the first 21-day period, which is really going to tighten up that calving distribution. By day 40, we had 43% in our 4s, 65% in our 5s, and 90% in our body condition score 6s. And on day 60 of the breeding season, now we have about half of the 4s that are pregnant and 96% of the body condition score 6s. So really wanting to keep these females, especially our heifers, between a 5.5 to a 6. So current management strategy, I would support being more efficient in when we're trying to add flesh body condition to these cattle, and more efficient to add body condition score before that late gestation or last trimester, because we have exponential growth of that calf, that female's getting ready to lactate, and so want to do that, be most cost efficient about when we're trying to do that. Body condition score those females 3 months before calving, so the end of that second trimester, so that we can line up feedstuffs and figure out how we're going to feed them, and adjust the nutritional program at least 60 days prior to, so that we can make that positive effect. And definitely use your county extension agent, assess your forages, your hays, let them assist you in interpreting, and then be able to balance the needs of that animal with what you have available. Kind of some parameters or benchmarks. So for our yearling heifers, again, we want them at a body condition score, trying to keep them between a 5.5 and a 6, with the expectation that these females are going to get pregnant. So after a 60-day period, I would expect at least 85% or more of those females to be pregnant, and I'd like for them to be in a 5.5 to a 6 at calving, especially based off of that data that I just showed. In our first calf heifers, it's important to recognize that first calf heifers are going to have a longer Anestrus, and so days postpartum prior to breeding, this is going to be an expectation that it's going to take about 45 days or more, because the average days postpartum Anestrus is about 20 days longer for those first calf heifers than mature cows. So think about, they not only have maintenance, but they're trying to meet their growth requirements. In addition to lactating for the first time, their dentation is changing, social hierarchy in the pasture, they're having to overcome quite a bit. And so that's why it's so important to have these heifers calving out first, so that they can have additional time to recover and for uterine involution. Body condition score at breeding. So I want to keep these between a 5.5 and a 6, with the expectation that 85% or better are going to be pregnant after 60 days. And then body condition score at calving, very similar to that at breeding, and then also for our yearling heifers, so 5.5 to 6. In terms of mature cows, want to give them 45 days. If you're going to use an estrous synchronization protocol and use a CEDAR, which we'll talk a little bit about, you want 20 days postpartum is really the soonest that we would be inserting a CEDAR if we're using, the 5 or 7 day protocol. If we try to insert a CEDAR before that time point, her reproductive tract is not going to be responsive to that CEDAR. And so CEDARs can jumpstart some of our late calvers, but they're less than 20 days postpartum. It's going to be fairly ineffective. So that's important to make sure that they're at least 45 days out from calving before breeding. Body condition score, we want them at a 5 or better, with the expectation that 90% of the herd of our mature cows will get pregnant in a 60-day period. And we want them to stay in good body condition score, again, from pregnancy, throughout gestation, and at calving. So Anestrus, or that postpartum recovery, successful reproductive performance moving on, is really going to be dependent on management throughout calving, breeding, thinking about how long it takes for uterine involution to occur, for that female to return to normal cyclicity and estrus or ovulation. It's going to happen between day 40 and 50 after calving if nutritional status is adequate. And as you would assume, if they are in low body condition score, they're on a decreasing plane of nutrition. It's going to take longer for those females to conceive, which means they're going to be late calvers next year, and we're going to have a larger spread for calving distribution. So again, that's the length of time from calving to conception, and in order to hit that benchmark of her producing one calf every year, we need to stay between 80 and 85 days. Our 2- and 3-year-old females are going to have longer anestrus periods, so that management should be adjusted considering that. Nutrition and body condition are definitely going to play in how long it takes for her to return to estrus. And so are there some things that we can do to reduce postpartum interval? So there are. One thing we need to take into mind is the impact of the suckling effect. And so postpartum interval is impacted by body condition score, nutrition, management, but also the stimulus of that calf suckling. And so that suckling calf actually causes a hormonal situation in which it inhibits luteinizing hormone release, which is important for ovulation and so for conception. And so by that calf suckling, it's going to prolong or delay resumption of estrus, or how long it takes for that female to start cycling again. And so knowing this, and there's been some work looking at temporary calf removal, and I know Dr. Megan Von Eman she'll talk about early weaning. There's also the opportunity to do temporary calf removal, and research has shown that it does not have a negative impact on the calf. This is best going to work whenever that cow cannot see, at least can't see those calves, and we would do this between 48 and 72 hours of pulling that calf off is how long it would take. And some research out of Kansas State University really noted that this was most beneficial for young and thin cows, but even in these body condition score 5 cows, and we know that they're likely going to lose body condition on a drought year, so they employed a temporary calf removal, and they noted a 6% improvement of rebreed up, and so 93% pregnancy versus 87 when they just did a 48 to a 72 hour calf removal. One thing to consider, is this feasible for your facility? So do you have somewhere to put those calves where they're not going to crawl out of that pen, or that cow is going to try to get in where they are? But it does work. Another option would be early weaning. Again, this is really beneficial for thin cows, most beneficial for those first calf heifers that are growing, lactating. It removes that demand for lactation. So early weaning is pulling all of those calves off. And I know that there was discussion in the previous talks about at what ages this can be done. And so this is going to remove that demand for lactation. It's going to remove that suckling effect. And so you're going to have those females resume estrus sooner because they don't have the calves outside, and they can really return to normal cyclicity, and hopefully we're going to get some of those females that can increase body condition because we don't have that calf outside. However, it creates a situation where, in terms of facilities and feedstuffs and labor, you have to ask your question, is this going to work for our operation? And so that's when I leave that up to you and making that decision and working with your extension agent and Dr. Megan Von Eman for it in terms of nutrition and what can be done. It does work. So here's some data looking at early weaning calves. So postpartum interval was decreased, and this is some older research. So they were able to decrease postpartum interval down to 73 days versus 90 days in some cattle. And then we have been able to note pregnancy success. So some research has shown a 12% increase when a herd was using artificial insemination, and a difference between 96% pregnancy success versus 59% in herds using natural service. And this was able to improve body condition of these females by 1 body condition score unit. And it assisted with improving growth of those 2 and 3-year-old females, and substantially heavier birth weights in the calves that were born the next year. Okay, so being able to pull those calves off, feed these calves, and then get heavier calves next year. Another option that we have is synchronization of estrus. You can also expose cattle to bulls prior to the breeding season, which if you have strong fencing, I know that that's an option. Estrus synchronization is an important option to consider if you aren't already. Dr. Cliff Lamb has looked at the cost of pregnancy loss. So $6.25 a head exposed for every 1% drop in pregnancy rate. And so using estrus synchronization can assist with the proportion of females that are born, the proportion of females that are pregnant in that first 21-day period of our breeding season. And again, that's going to help out on that calving distribution. And estrus synchronization is either going to use one or a combination of exogenous hormones, so GnRH, progestins, as well as prostaglandin. And so this is going to create synchrony of the estrus in our females in a group. So it's going to synchronize anestrus, and it's also going to assist with getting all of our females tighter estrus point where we can breed them at a tighter point for artificial insemination or your bulls. And so we'll talk about the opportunity to use estrus synchronization for natural service, but also AI. So we can increase the response to the first GnRH using estrus synchronization and create synchrony in terms of when ovulation occurs in our group. One benefit to estrus synchronization and having a tighter calving distribution is the profitability. And so there's been some research showing estrus synchronization in high producing herds whereby they had greater proportion of calves that were born in that first 21-day period, and by day 60 of the season they had 94% of their calves born. So that creates an opportunity in terms of our marketing where those calves are going to be more uniform, they're heavier, they're older. You potentially could market them at an earlier time point, potentially when they're 500 pounds, depending on your grazing strategy and where you have them. You know, we could see a benefit from $50 to $75 per calf because of them being, you know, older and heavier. Another opportunity is branding programs. So your cattle might be being raised in a situation where you could actually increase how much you're getting per calf because of a branding program that you could enroll in. So again, synchronization of estrus is really going to assist us with getting more of our females bred in that first 21-day period of the breeding season. MGA is a exogenous hormone that we can feed. It is only labeled for heifers, and so that's why you'll see quite a bit of research with MGA, but it's in heifers rather than in cows. Cedars, so that is an intravaginal insert that is impregnated with progesterone, and so it can assist in jump-starting our anestrus cows. So cows should still be a minimum of 20 days postpartum or calving before we start a synchronization protocol in order for that cedar to work effectively. First calf heifers, again, they're going to need more time, and this is why we should push, if able, to breed them first so that they can calve out first. Estrus synchronization with heifers, again, we can use estrus synchronization with natural service or artificial insemination. So one option is to use a cedar insert. If you have the ability to feed and you have them in a dry lot, you may choose to use MGA. So for example, one program is a 14-day MGA feeding protocol. So you feed them for 14 days, and then you're going to put the bulls in 10 days after you finish up feeding that MGA. And in terms of the bull to female ratio, if I'm using yearling bulls, then I want 1 bull for every 15 synchronized heifers. If I have a mature bull, I can put 1 mature bull for 20 synchronized heifers. You can also use estrous synchronization in cows for natural service or AI. And so this is some data showing from Dr. Les Anderson, whereby they had cattle that either did not receive a seeder or they received a seeder. And so, as we would assume, we had a higher pregnancy rate in those that received a seeder because we were able to probably jumpstart some of those females that were still in estrus. And so, pregnant in the first 30 days, we actually had 80% of those cows pregnant in the first 30 days for those that received a seeder and then natural service. There are also a multitude of other estrous synchronization protocols that can be used for natural service or artificial insemination. Commonly used protocols out there, 7-day co-sync, there's a 5-day seeder protocol. There's some promising research with the 7 and 7. So there's 7 and 7 in the cows, and there's actually been some similar research whereby they injected GnRH in a 14-day protocol with heifers, and so they're seeing promise in both heifers and cows. And so as time goes on, I'm sure that we'll see a recommendation of these protocols moving forward. When determining which synchronization protocol to use, we need to think about, are we going to do heat detection, or are we going to do fixed timed AI, and then what her estrus cycle status is currently. So prostaglandin injections work really well when females are cycling. However, if they are not, seeders, so that progestin product can induce cyclicity, shorten that postpartum interval in those non-cycling. And so that would be that anestrus cow, but also heifers that have not reached puberty yet. One of the most important factors that you need to consider are your resources. So your time, your labor, your facilities, and then the cost. And cost, I will say, cost varies by protocol, and then determining if you're lined up to be able to have those cattle go through the chute, and then what are some alternatives. So, heifers, you might choose to use something like an MGA protocol. Postpartum period, this is going to assist to that estrous synchronization, is going to shorten that of postpartum interval, but we also need to make sure that we recognize that those females that just calved out not too long ago are most likely not going to respond, but it can jumpstart those females if we're waiting at least 20 days. And we still want these females on a good plane of nutrition, taking in mind forage availability, trying to keep those females in a body condition score 5 to a 6. So if you're curious about using estrous synchronization for fixed time AI with heat detection or with natural service, please reach out to your extension agent, also your veterinarian, and the various cattle breeding companies out there. Feel free to contact me if you have additional questions. This is one really great resource that I use quite often and I promote. So the Beef Reproduction Task Force, these are the figures that you'll commonly see in the catalogs from the cattle breeding companies. And so what these are showing are figures, is a figure of the estrus synchronization protocols that the Reproductive Task Force support, because we have the data, substantial data showing that these protocols are effective and will result in adequate pregnancy rates of the protocols for heifers and cows. And here is their website if that's something that you're interested in looking at. In terms of handling and facilities, you don't have to have your neighbor set up. You don't have to have a silencer chute. You can use a permanent or portable facility. So that really creates a situation where you have flexibility, such as this is from University of Missouri's Extension. And they used a portable system, put a breeding box on the front of it, and so those animals didn't have to be up at headquarters in order to breed them, and then they went back on range. Hopefully your chute looks a little bit newer than this one, but I'm sure we could get it done even in that older chute. So that's actually a picture from the Ranch Heritage Museum down in Lubbock, Texas, Texas Tech University, where I did my master's. And I've always thought that was pretty neat. One thing that I want to make sure to point out is to handle your cattle and use appropriate cattle handling. So think about your BQA training. Stress will increase cortisol. This has a negative impact on pregnancy because it actually blocks that luteinizing hormone that's important for ovulation. We want to get these females bred early. We want to have more of them conceiving early on in that breeding season. And then we also want to go in and assess pregnancy early so that gives us an opportunity to know who's pregnant and then how we're going to market those animals, potentially cull early, identify which animals, in addition to knowing those that had issues with gestation, go ahead and get rid of those. So late calvers, open females, we know are going to cost us money. So assess pregnancy early so you can cull early. There are a multitude of options in terms of pregnancy status assessment, be it that you are pulling blood. So here I'm pulling blood from the neck. You can also pull blood from the tail. There are various opportunities in terms of being able to send off that blood and having it sent back to you in a few days to assess pregnancy. $2.50 in order to send that blood off, and then you will simply be able to know whether that female's pregnant or not, versus transrectal palpation and ultrasonography are actually going to show you if there is a viable fetus at that time point, and then your veterinarian or technician that you're using can actually say the age of the fetus, and if you assess between day 55 and 75, you'd actually know, you can determine the sex of the calf. So that way you would be able to have an idea of what your calves are going to be, and then potentially have some flexibility in terms of marketing. Nutrition impacts pregnancy maintenance, so thinking about embryonic loss. Fertilization actually occurs at a higher rate than we probably think. And so, your technician, your veterinarian goes and breeds, artificially inseminates that cow and says, okay, she's bred. Well, fertilization occurs in about 90% of those occurrences where we put that semen in there in that female. And so she's bred for that time, but our problem that we're continuing to do research in is this early embryonic loss. And so factors that can play into why we lose those pregnancies in that first trimester include oocyte quality, disease, genetic abnormalities, as well as nutritional stress. And so this is another reason why we want to make sure those females are in an elevated plane of nutrition, not losing, not in a negative plane of nutrition, so that we don't have nutritional stress that's occurring at breeding, but then also after breeding. And if we think about it from a standpoint, early embryonic loss, environmental stressors, this can be due to nutrition. She is partitioning nutrients. She may have to decide on survival. And so in those really low body condition score females, this can be an issue. Also, shipping can cause pregnancy loss. And so we'll talk about transportation stress. And so it's important that we try to minimize these negative impacts post-breeding. So transportation stress, research has shown us that we can have pregnancy loss if we're transporting those recently bred cows, recently bred females between day 4 and 42. And the reason being is because around, typically if we go ahead and breed those females, so if we're doing something like fixed time day out, so everybody got bred at one time point, we can put them on a trailer shortly after, within that 4-day period, first few days after breeding, because hopefully that sperm, that oocyte have met, fertilization has occurred, and so that zygote is in the oviduct, and so we're not going to cause drastic stress there. But between day 4 and 42, before attachment of that embryo, that's when we can have embryonic loss occur. And so that's why we, support transporting those females either shortly after breeding, in that 4-day period, or waiting after 42 days. And there's some research supporting that we may need to wait as long as a couple of months after breeding so that we potentially don't cause transportation stress and lose some pregnancies from that. I want to point out this is for transportation stress. Obviously, those animals are used to being trailed from pasture or area from one to another, and so if you're on horseback or you're pushing your cattle via side by side with dogs or something like that, and they're used to it, it's not going to cause that same stress as them being transported, because we consider those animals are not transported that much over the course of their production life cycle. In terms of culling, so we want to be strict on our culling. This really helps out if we have individual cow records, knowing what she produced in terms of weaning weight on that calf from last year. Did she breed up early? So we went in 30 days post AI, and so on that first ultrasound, we know that she was pregnant versus those open females. Did she have dystocia? What was her body condition score? If you don't have individual cow records, again, we can assess by parity. So if you have those replacement heifers and you got those 2s and 3s that you're managing separately in addition to your matures. If she's an old cow, is it dentation? Is it structural soundness? Is it teat issues, udder issues? That's important to consider here. This will be a year, and potentially we could have several years depending on drought length that you're having to cull hard like that. So thinking about individual cow records, reproductive performance, really getting rid of those low producing cows, getting rid of those late calvers, because they're going to be a little bit more difficult in terms of us being strategic with our supplementation. And then also potential to have a tighter calf group and be able to market them in that way. And then our replacement heifers. So it might be a year that you don't keep as many replacement heifers. So really going in and thinking about when that heifer was born, what cow she was out of, and it might be that you decide to not keep her this year when in maybe a better year you would. Okay, having a multi-year strategy is really going to be important, and so including culling early, but also potentially considering that we may have to cull more females over multiple years and not just this year. So kind of having a plan for the issues ahead. We focus quite a bit on our females, and so I wanted to spend some time talking about the bulls. So when we think about bull management, we of course want to include a breeding soundness exam, having our veterinarian do that. If we're going around to one of our really great bull sales in the state, that yearling bull is going to come and should come with a passing breeding soundness exam. That examination is essentially evaluating whether that bull should be able to breed females. Okay, and so they're going to look at several different things. They're going to assess bull physical condition, so his eyes. They need to be able to see those females. He may not first off see a female in heat. It might be another female mounting her that he sees, and then he's going to go over and service that female. He needs to be able to have good structural soundness to cover range and be able to cover those females. Veterinarian will also palpate the accessory glands. So essentially what they're feeling for is inflammation and making sure that that animal is not potentially sick. If a bull has had a fever, this could impact sperm production, sperm quality, thinking about how long spermatogenesis takes. So it takes about 2 months. So doing a BSE is a snapshot of what was going on with that bull 2 months ago. It's not a snapshot of where he's going to be 2 months from now, but it can at least tell us whether that bull is failing today, so that we don't put them out there with females with the making the assumption that he's going to be able to service them. Scrotal circumference, I think we've done a great job of, really considering the genetics and differences as far as age and breed for scrotal circumference, looking at up to 24 months. And they're also going to do a semen collection and evaluate that with the parameters of at least 30% or more of that sperm need to be motile, have normal morphology. So BSE does not assess libido, so sex drive, and that's one thing that we need to talk about in terms of really monitoring these bulls when we put them out on females. Drought does impact bull fertility, so those bulls are in poor condition, they're on a decreasing plane of nutrition, probably with drought if they're not able to get the nutrients that they need, so it can actually delay attainment of puberty. And if it's bad enough, we can actually have decrease in testicular weight, sperm motility, concentration, and permanently impair sperm output of that bull. So it can be quite serious depending on the severity of the situation. So with our bulls, if we can, we would like to be able to manage them by age. So thinking about those bulls that we're developing, those yearling bulls, as well as our mature bulls. And so body condition impacts sperm production. We want to keep our bulls between a body condition score 5 and a 6, so not that different from our mature cows. And we're putting, this concept that we know that they're going to lose substantial body weight and condition over that breeding season if they're working. And these bulls can lose anywhere from 100 to 200 pounds over a breeding season. And so by making sure that they're in good body condition score before they go out on cows, because we know it's quite difficult to put body condition on these bulls during breeding season, you're giving them a little bit extra energy reserve that that they're going to use during that time. And we want to evaluate our bulls about 3 months before the breeding season starts, and that allows us for the opportunity to get in better feedstuffs, get them on an elevated plane of nutrition, really get them in good body condition score before we put them out on those females. And we want to do a breeding soundness examination at least 4 to 6 weeks before your breeding season starts, because if he fails that BSE, again, that's just a quick snapshot of what was going on 2 months ago, then that gives us the opportunity to come back a few weeks later, test him again before we put him out on those females. And if he fails again, then we need to be able to pull up some different bulls and put them in with the females that we were going to put him with. And another thing I might add, we purchase bulls, frequently purchase bulls from bull sales or another producer, and they come with a passing BSE, but that's again one snapshot. So that is not one BSE for each bull, and we don't need to worry about him next year. We really need to make sure we're doing BSEs annually so that we're not just keeping bulls around and feeding bulls that are not servicing cattle. Libido is important to monitor. So again, that sex drive, we don't have the ability to do a libido assessment with these BSEs when we have our veterinarian come out and put the bulls in the chute and do a BSE for us. And so the way that we need to do this to make sure that that bull has sex drive, because there will be a very small percentage of bulls that are just not going to have a sex drive and they're not going to adequately cover these females. So we need to monitor our bulls. We want to do it about a week after, we want to monitor these bulls that week after we turn them out, and then about every week afterwards. Our yearling bulls, we want to monitor them more frequently. And so this is actually watching those bulls and make sure that they are able to mount, that they penetrate and successfully service those females. And so you think about heat detection. You're not going out there one day, watching them just for a few minutes and walking away. Going out there in the morning when they're more active, and in the evening when they're more active, and really assessing and making sure that all of those bulls are truly servicing females. Social dominance will play in to your bull groups, and so this is why it's not a good idea to start the breeding season off by just loading up your bulls that have not been housed together and dumping them all in a group of females and letting them fight it out. They really should be going and servicing those females. And so if we can house those bulls together and let them establish the social hierarchy and who's going to be dominant a month before, we can really let them work it out before you put them in with the females. That way they can go ahead and get to work when you do put them out. And knowing that there was going to be an older, more dominant bull in that group, and that one bull likely is going to breed more females than any of those other bulls in that group. And so this is important to consider, because if that older, more dominant bull is in poor body condition score or he's injured, make sure that we're pulling him out of that group and putting in another bull during that time point. With this drought consideration, it might be that halfway through the breeding season, you're pulling out bulls to try to put body condition on him after working, and you're putting a different bull in there that you haven't used, or perhaps that's in better body condition when you notice those bulls are working hard. In terms of the bull to female ratio discussion, for our mature bulls, so those 3s, 4s, and 5s, we can use a 1 bull to 25 to 1 bull to 50 female ratio, depending on where they're located, the range that you're putting them out on, the topography. And for our yearling bulls, we only want to put about 20 females in with them. If you're using estrous synchronization in natural service, we really want to try to use those mature bulls at a ratio of 1 to 15 female. In summary, nutrition is critical. Really want to use body condition score as a free way to assess those females and those bulls and adjust our management and our feedstuffs that we're providing them, especially during this time of drought. Some management options to consider moving forward if you aren't already: use of assisted reproductive technology such as pregnancy checking, pregnancy diagnosis, artificial insemination, and estrous synchronization. Really explore, is early weaning an option for you, and having an idea and a plan in terms of facilities and how you're going to market those and feed those calves. Really being selective in limiting replacement heifer retention, and being more cognizant of the females that you are keeping around. Being really strict on culling parameters this year, and making sure that we're lining those females up for success, because this time will pass and we'll be in a better situation. And so we want to make sure that we still have those good females there at the end, so that we're not having to try to go out and buy the great genetics that we already had in our herd. And again, please make sure that you're managing those bulls with as much attention as we are females. And with that, I would like to ask you that if you do have any questions, please feel free to let your extension agent know. Feel free to email me. So this is my email address, carlasanford@montana.edu. If you aren't already, please feel free to join us and follow us at Montana State University's Beef Extension Team social media accounts. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we also have videos, more webinar videos such as this one, at our webpage. So feel free to use that link there. And if there's ever anything I can do for you in the future, please don't hesitate. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.